I'd like to welcome everybody back to Alabama Care. Today we are in Homewood with Mrs. Karen Baggett, the speech language pathologist here at Children's Rehabilitation Service in Homewood. And today we're going to be talking about augmentative and alternative communication. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over. Mrs. Baggett, if you would introduce yourself.
Hey there, I'm Karen Baggett. Like he said, I'm a speech pathologist with CRS in Homewood. I have been here in our Homewood office for almost 14 years. The speech pathologists with CRS do a variety of clinics, evaluation and medical clinics, but AAC is a big piece of what we do here. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Just in general, AAC stands for augmentative and alternative communication. And really it's any form of communication other than verbal speech is what AAC is. So honestly, we all use AAC in some ways. Gestures and facial expressions are considered augmentative forms of communication. Obviously, we all use technology also to communicate with others through social media, through texting. And that has, just been booming in the last decade or a few
20
decades.
years, yeah.
So, yeah. And another thing to talk about with augmentative and alternative communication is the piece of augmentative. So it's not just for folks who are completely nonverbal, who aren't able to speak, but it also may be for users who are able to speak, but their verbal speech may not always be easy to understand, especially with people who are not familiar to them. So it may be a supplemental way that they communicate, just one of the many ways. And then the alternative piece would be for folks who do not have the ability to communicate verbally with verbal speech.
So the augmentative is for kind of helping those that have verbal speech but may need some additional assistance, and then the alternative is if somebody is kind of nonverbal at that point.
Yes, and it's just interesting. I've actually had a user point out that a lot of people just don't realize that with the augmentative piece, it does not mean that we are abandoning verbal speech. It never means that it's going to hinder a child's development of verbal speech. We actually see in research that it enhances the ability for them to actually be more functionally verbal or more functionally communicative.
Yeah, and I like how you point out that we all use kind of AAC, whether that's tone of voice or posture, like you said, facial expressions, eye contact. Communicating through all of our senses.
Right.
And how we can do that.
Right. And AAC users use multiple forms of communication. Even if they're not verbal, they have a lot of natural ways that they communicate through facial expressions, gestures, specific sounds. And certainly those are sometimes even more important than the actual augmentative communication device because they are faster and easier for that person. And so we need to just keep in mind that AAC, as far as a communication device, is extremely helpful, but it's just one of the many ways that someone might communicate. And really, one is not necessarily more important than the other.
Now, you did mention that some people might be a little bit indifferent about using some of these devices because they feel like it could hinder their progression. If you would talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's several myths, I would say, that surround AAC in general. And oftentimes, it can be difficult when, especially for very young children, we obviously all want, our children to be able to develop verbal speech and be able to communicate. That is a huge piece of our quality of life. And so sometimes there is, a, hindrance to, or just a resistance to maybe wanting to introduce that to a very young child. And we just try to really provide a lot of education about how it can build language skills and really stimulate the language portion of the brain to have access to those things. So our hope is always that the verbal speech continues to improve, and research shows that if they are able to do so, then it does enhance that.
When you talk about that, I feel like it's kind of anchoring just a step ahead of where that child might be progressing, kind of like monkey bars where you can reach out and grab onto the next one and help progress through that.
Right. Yeah. And I think, there's a fear that, especially with a child, that they might rely on that form of communication while not developing a more natural form, but we just don't see that happening. And we have to think about that typically developing children are exposed to language for 12 to 18 months before they actually are able to be functionally verbal before we really expect that. And if for some reason a child has a condition which affects the muscles of the mouth or the language center of the brain or that type of development, it's going to be difficult for them to develop language in that way. So this is giving them a way in which they could actually functionally use language. So bringing it in earlier can really actually be very helpful to natural communication skills.
Yeah. I wonder if we kind of did AAC for the entire population, what we would see, a quicker advancement across all.
It's possible. I mean, certainly having those visual and auditory cues through, an electronic communication device, it just adds that extra bit of stimulation when they're learning. And we don't discourage, especially SLPs who work with children in groups. They may have users who are not verbal in groups with children who are verbal, but using the communication devices with everyone in the group can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Now, so there are a wide variety of augmentative and alternative communication devices, but I feel like a lot of the newer electronic stuff came out in the last 20, 30 years.
Yes.
If you could give a little bit of history kind of behind AAC.
Yeah. So for as much as I understand, I feel like AAC has really been around since maybe 1920. I think, the first communication boards like paper communication boards with picture symbols that people could point to. I believe they were developed for people with cerebral palsy to be able to communicate better. But I think the first electronic communication device came about around 1960. And, back then it wasn't quite computer level, but I think they used assistive technology like sip and puff for folks with motor impairment.
What would that look, or what is that?
So it's a straw that they might wear in their mouth, and they could blow for a certain movement it was a keyboard device.
Okay.
And then actually suck into the straw to perform a different activity.
That's amazing. And that was 60 years ago we were doing that.
Yeah. And then, shortly after there were a lot of devices that came out in the 70s where it was, more computer-like type devices. That came out and several different options at that point. And since then it has just,
blown up. Well, I always say that
exponentially.
I feel like the devices and the innovation that we see in the community for the disability community get adopted by the greater, everybody else once those things have been perfected and incorporated. Like, we're talking about using a keyboard in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
Today, everybody is using it on their phones, that kind of stuff. So I feel like a lot is contributed or should be contributed to the community for coming up with these.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
pioneers.
Hopefully a lot of times, users are able to, provide helpful information about what actually is going to work best for them through the things that we have available to us, on a daily basis. Obviously, the more normal, and I'll put that in air quotes, a technology is, the more accepted it's going to be by the user. They want the things that, iPads and iPhones and things like that. And just to back up just a little bit, talking about AAC, I wanted to point out too, with some of the myths and things like that, there's really no entry level criteria for someone to be eligible to use AAC. They don't necessarily have to go through the stages of all the really low tech items to get to the high tech point. We don't ever want to withhold AAC because of a suspicion that they maybe have not developed their cognitive skills quite as much as hoped for their age. But really, it's very, very difficult to be able to actually assess people for cognition and language skills without a way to communicate. And so, a lot of times we're really able to see what a person really understands by providing them with AAC. So we should never wait just because we suspect that they don't understand.
Yeah, give them the opportunity. And I've come across that a few times, maybe with parents and limiting beliefs on their children. And sometimes you just got to let them go and see what they can do, and they'll surprise you.
Right, right.
They'll blow you away there.
And I'd much rather take a big leap of faith and provide something to someone. And then if after 6 months or so it's just not happening, then we can back up at that point. But, while we may still recommend very low tech items and whatever's most appropriate for that user in that moment of time, I don't want people to feel that they have to kind of go through those stages or, show proficiency with very low-tech items before they're allowed to try high-tech devices.
When you were talking about that, it reminds me, I have a family member, and I did a broadcast with somebody at Adaptive Aquatics, Joe Ray, and they do water skiing down south a little bit. And I was thinking about my family member, my aunt, and if she would like that or not. And she may hate it, but that's not my decision.
Right.
So to give her the opportunity to do that is up, I'll provide that, and then it's up to her to see if she wants to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, the AAC, I feel like, is kind of a new thing, and I think it's important to make sure that the younger audience is learning about that. Now, if you could tell us a little bit about what you do with Sanford.
Yeah, so AAC typically, over the past, it's hard to say 30, 40 years when you think about how long it's been. But I've been out of school. I've been a speech pathologist practicing for about 21 years now. And so it has always really just been a special interest for SLPs, not necessarily a required course that we take. It's been a very small part of what we're provided with in graduate school. And so now in the last 2 years, it's now actually a required course for accredited universities to be a speech pathologist, which I am so thrilled about. So I teach the graduate course at Sanford University. It's called AAC, Augmented and Alternative Communication, and the second year graduate students take that. I just finished that course this week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm so excited. I think I would love to spread the love for AAC, and I just want SLPs out there to be much more aware and not really, I think previously it's potentially kind of a scary piece if they feel that they're maybe not proficient with technology or they, so I just want to make sure that all of the SLPs coming out now are kind of knowing that they can do it.
Yeah, aware of it and having it as a tool in their belt.
Absolutely. And just the prevalence of the need has increased so much over the years.
I love how CRS and ADRS are working with local schools and universities to introduce these topics to students at a younger age. We did a broadcast with a gentleman who does some of the augmentative communication devices and the engineering side of it, and he contacts schools so that these students can get an opportunity to work on, kind of creating new solutions for individuals in the school setting.
Right.
So you guys have those good connections in the community here. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my roles as a speech pathologist here is to provide that training. We do the evaluation process for the clients and their families, and then we provide training to them. But we also go into the schools. We can go into private speech therapy settings. We provide training to the teachers and SLPs and the team that works with that client, because we're not able to be there all the time. We're not able to provide that ongoing therapy. So we kind of train the trainers. We make sure that everybody's comfortable, and it's really an ongoing process. It's really a consultative role that we can go in as needed.
So it's not like someone will get an AAC device and you're like, okay, here you go. But you guys actually go through the process of training the individual, their parents, their teachers, their team, like you said.
Yes, absolutely.
So everyone can support them if something comes up.
Yes, and we actually involve them when we can in the evaluation process, because they are often folks who know this client much better than we will in, an hour evaluation period. And so we gather a lot of information beforehand, and we can talk about that process of the AAC evaluation. But in general, AAC is a big commitment. There's a big learning curve, especially for these really high-tech devices. They provide such great opportunities for the users, but it's not like you can just hand this to them and they're going to immediately know how to use it. A lot of times I use the analogy of it's really like if I were to hand you a saxophone.
I'd hand it right back to you.
Play me a beautiful song. Right. I mean, it would take potentially a year or two, honestly, for you to actually be able to do that functionally, and you'd have to practice quite a bit.
Yeah.
So we really have to have teams on board. Families really need to be interested and willing, and obviously most of the time they are very excited about this opportunity, but then it can be a little overwhelming once they have it in hand. So we just want to be there for that and help people be as comfortable as possible. The client, obviously, but also everybody that's working with them on a regular basis.
Yeah, because they're going to be in that setting more often than you may be.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So they'll be the go-to
all day, every day, really.
Yeah. Handing over the saxophone makes me think of my sister when she first got a clarinet, and it took her 2 years to, I think, pronounce a note, and the dogs would chime in and the howling, and so it does take time.
It can be a little bit of a painful process, but it's worth it,
Shut your door.
Yes.
And you mentioned that you never want to turn somebody away, but are there specific age groups that are eligible?
So with CRS, we work from ages birth to 21, but I do cross over a bit with ADRS. I can work with adult clients coming in through vocational rehab or state of Alabama independent living. I wouldn't say that we've typically seen children younger than 18 months, because there is a level of some attention or even just communicative intent. We really wouldn't expect children under the age of 12 to 18 months to really be able to functionally communicate naturally.
Yeah.
And so while I say there's really no entry level, it's not often that we would have children under the age of 2. But we certainly do. We have a child scheduled actually next week who will be 2 next month.
Yeah.
And so there is not really an entry level age, and then there's certainly not anyone who would be too old to start that process. Obviously, AAC hasn't been around that long, and then the really newer high-tech devices, apps that can go on cell phones and iPads, those have really only been around in the last years, and so the technology that's available now for adults who may have not been able to communicate well their whole lives, it is not too late to start that process and try that. And I mean, it can be really a huge quality of life changer.
And someone that's older might not have had that opportunity when they were younger to have these types of devices so readily available. And so they're getting a second chance opportunity there.
Yes. And they were just a lot larger, clunkier, more difficult to program. And the support just wasn't there. Like I said, it wasn't something that we all learned how to do. You had to have kind of a special interest in that to pursue it. So I think it was limited, just the folks that were able to provide training and expertise with that.
Now, I want to encourage any parents or family to not be scared or turned off about getting the help that they believe their son or daughter may, need or use. Do you sometimes find that parents will bring in a child and they'll say, I wish we would have done this sooner?
A lot.
Yeah.
Yes. All the time. And that makes me sad. And so I hope that I hear that less and less as time goes on, especially as new SLPs are graduating with more of a knowledge of AAC. I much prefer that it be implemented sooner than later. I mean, it's, there's that huge piece of language development.
You have to hit early. It makes
such a difference. And, it's never too late to start, but it does become harder when there's so much time and expectations as a child gets older. There's a lot to surmount with, academics and things like that.
Now, what are some things that maybe a parent might see at 2 years old that would prompt them to say, I think we should see a speech language pathologist?
Yeah, so some of the red flags, especially for AAC, would be, no verbal speech by age 2. That doesn't necessarily mean that a child's not going to develop verbal speech. There are certainly late bloomers or kids with just specific language impairments. So just to get a consult with a speech pathologist in general, I would say 18 months to 2 years if there's no verbal speech. But red flags for AAC potentially may show up around that time or a little bit later, where a child may demonstrate that they understand. They can follow directions. They can identify things by name. If someone says, where's your shoes, or go get your cup, or throw this in the garbage, kids are understanding, but then not saying anything verbally. So if there's that gap between what they understand and what they can actually express, that is a big red flag. And I would say, that might warrant at least some introduction of AAC. Also, if a child is diagnosed with an impairment that would lend itself to chronic communication difficulties or motor impairment, particularly with the oral musculature.
Okay.
And an example of that would be cerebral palsy. But there's also a lot of genetic syndromes, Down syndrome, Rett syndrome, things like that. And then certainly with autism, there's diagnoses that would certainly indicate that there's potentially going to be a need for extra help with communication.
Now, when you say no verbal speech, is that there's no noise or sound, or does it mean there's no word formage?
Yeah, so typically, unless there's a pretty significant structural impairment physically, then there's going to be sound.
Yeah.
There's going to be attempts at communication. So I would say, no clear words or word approximations. And then if a child is very verbal, but the speech is not understandable by someone other than a parent or close family member, typically that's not going to happen until at least age 2 to 3 because kids just aren't expected to be very verbal before that.
Yeah.
But if and kids are going to have potentially articulation impairments that they're going to need to address, but that doesn't mean they're going to need AAC. But if it is at a point that's relatively severe, that other people would not understand, or would understand maybe less than 70% of what they would say, that's a pretty big red flag as well.
Yeah, I asked that because I have no idea at what age children are supposed to be able to form words. I don't have any kids of my own, so this is all new to me.
So usually around 12 months, kids will speak their first words, and they're single words typically.
Mom, dad,
yes,
ball.
and I mean there's a wide range of normal, obviously. But then around 18 months to 2 years, we expect that they're going to have at least 50 single words and then even start put those words together into like 2-word phrases.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of expands from there. By 3 to 4, they should be using short sentences.
That's an exponential growth going from 1 to 2 words at 12 months to 18 months having 50.
Yes.
So
that's the biggest piece. I mean, I think that's the biggest language explosion that we'd see.
Yeah. So if you're a parent and you notice that that explosion's not happening,
right,
that could warrant, hey,
Absolutely.
let's go see an SLP.
Absolutely.
I would like to, there are quite a few devices that we're going to be talking about today, and I appreciate you bringing some physical examples of that. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to kind of showcase what some of those look like, all the way from no tech to high tech, and we'll bring them on camera and just talk about them.
Okay, perfect. So definitely we'll start with the no tech type of communication. And this is really can be available in any classroom to anybody. And basically, you just think about picture symbols. So there is a very specific form of AAC called PECS, which stands for Picture Exchange Communication System. And that's actually a pretty formal system. Folks who implement PECS actually go through formal training for the steps of that. But use of picture symbols as a way to communicate doesn't have to be the formal PECS version. It can just be use of a communication notebook. So an example of that, this one is way too big to actually be someone's communication notebook. But in here we have very specific picture symbols. So this would be a page of foods. They could pull off, here's a really good one, pizza. That would potentially be one I would pull off pretty quickly. But there's a lot of different options. We've got French fries. All different types of things. So they could have a communication notebook with different pages that would represent categories of vocabulary, and folks can learn to flip through those pages to find the thing that they want. A book might be quite cumbersome to carry around, and so there are definitely no-tech options, or some people might even call this low-tech. I tend to make it a little bit different, and I'll show you an example of low-tech. But when you pull in technology, I think of something that at least has a battery or some sort of like electronic piece to it. So this is a good example of a no-tech communication board. This is one from Tobii Dynavox, and they have a language system called Snap Core. It's actually now called TD Snap. Companies will change the names of things ongoing, and that can be one of the most overwhelming pieces. But this is just an example of what one of their page sets might look like. But a user could potentially use this to point to the pictures, either at a single word level, if they wanted to say stop, or at a full sentence level. They could say, I like, go, and then they may have, some other picture symbols available to them. So this is another example. It's a communication board that would potentially represent full messages for them. So being able to touch this one, that means I don't know. Okay, so it can be at a single word level or full messages. And then to go, and this actually would be something you might also use along with a high-tech communication device, because they are sometimes cumbersome and have to be mounted, and there's a lot of parts and pieces. We often recommend backup no or low tech items for folks so that they do have a quick, easy way to communicate when their device isn't available or, for whatever reason.
For my family member, we use a Tech Talk.
Okay.
And we have kind of a printout like that. And when she's highly motivated, she will use it.
Yes.
She's not a big fan of it. Other than that, one of her favorite things to do is drink coffee.
Okay.
And one of her goals is to use her Tech Talk to say, I'd like some coffee. And then I need the coffee cup. I need the Keurig, and I need the water.
Yes.
And she'll create that by herself, but we're trying to incentivize her to use her Tech Talk to communicate. And then the other sheet that we have is yes, no, which I think is very important.
Absolutely.
I think the word no is probably the most valuable word in our language, is telling somebody you don't want that. But she has not yet gone through the sentences, and she's 57.
Yeah.
So we've been working on it for a number of years, but we continue to switch up the board.
Yeah.
When she's highly motivated, she enjoys it because she knows if she clicks this, she's going to get that coffee.
Yeah. So I'll get to the devices, but just to touch on that a little bit, folks are really just going to communicate about what they care about.
Yeah.
And that's difficult as teachers and SLPs out in the field trying to take data and target these academic standards and things like that. Really, when it's true communication, it's about making a connection with someone and building a relationship. And, they're going to communicate best and be most motivated about the things that they care about and the things that are fun to them. So we need to always think about that when implementing communication. You have to be really creative about choosing target words for your user. And the sentence thing, honestly, obviously we do speak in full sentences, but there's a lot of times that you may ask me a question about, hey, what do you want to eat for lunch? I'm going to say pizza. I'm not going to say, I want pizza, please. So we tend to set devices up with these big full sentences. It really may not be the way that we talk. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that there's not full sentences, because really, again, it's just about communicating that message.
It's like a text kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's her way of doing that text.
Yeah.
I'll send that text.
We're kind of all starting to talk a little more about how we should probably set devices up. So moving forward to like the technology pieces of it. So the low tech communication devices.
No, this is exactly, so there are going to be a few, maybe some breaks today in the broadcast, and that's just where we're setting up some technology to show you guys and introducing some videos. So please stay with us, and I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, so this is an example of a low-tech communication device. People may be a little more familiar with something called a Big Mac, which would be like maybe a big red round button.
Oh, yeah.
And with this one, I have a picture symbol. There's a little clear piece over my button, and I have a picture symbol under that. I actually have this actual toy. And so this one, when you turn it on, this one can actually hang or sit on the table, and it's got a pretty big target. So
I want the ball game.
It says, I want the ball game. And this is an actual picture of the ball game we have in our office. So it's a really close match to what they're actually requesting. Obviously, with some of the picture symbols that you saw on that no-tech board, those are a little more abstract.
Go ahead.
That's something to think about as well. Some people need that concrete representation, but others maybe can handle symbols. And we also have to think about really functional words like go and stop and more, so really it's hard to come up with a concrete picture of those more abstract verbs and concepts. So that's where the symbols kind of come in.
I like how you have the actual picture there, because we do that where I'll take the picture of the K-Cup and the Keurig.
Yes.
And then we've done it before where we'll go to McDonald's and take a picture of McDonald's.
Yes.
But she hasn't made that connection, it doesn't seem, through the goal progress.
Okay.
But I think it's cool to use the actual pictures of the object or whatever that's going to be, so they can put themselves in the place of receiving that if they ask for it. I'd like to question about the importance of the verbal feedback, that if you press the button, do you notice that it is important that it says coffee back?
Yeah, so that is a big difference between the no-tech and low-tech options. A lot of times, and when I'm talking about this, a lot of times I'll reference young kids, but that would be the majority of the folks that I work with. So that's just where my familiarity lies. But, it's not uncommon that someone might suggest that a young child may need to go through these low-tech stages through PEC's program, and if they don't make it past a certain place, then they're not really going to be eligible to try a high-tech device. And that's what I wanted to just point out, that I don't recommend that, because the piece of this, while they're very helpful and they're great options for communication, they don't provide that audio feedback. And so that auditory input piece is just an extra piece of stimulation for the brain. It helps to make that connection, and it needs to be kind of a quick response. And so that's just adding another layer of stimulation to the brain to give that audio feedback.
Yeah.
Does that
No,
kind of
that's
answer
exactly
your
what I was
question?
asking. And the follow-up to that is, when the individual asks, or the child asks for that toy, make sure that it is available immediately.
Yes, whenever
Instant
possible,
gratification.
they should have a motor plan associated with activating something, whether that's pointing to a picture symbol or pressing a button on a device. The physical piece of that also stimulates the brain. They see the picture, that's their visual input. They hear the auditory feedback, and then they get that natural consequence.
Yep.
And so all of those pieces are part of how we acquire language typically, but also how these AAC users would need to acquire their language skills. It's all a part of that learning process. Obviously, if a child asks for cookies at dinner, you acknowledge the request. So sometimes the immediate natural consequence may not be that they get the cookie for dinner, but the consequence may be that their request was acknowledged and then denied. So just like a verbal child asking for cookies at dinner, it's fine to say, no, you can't have it. But maybe after dinner, that might be the dessert you pick.
I love how we're breaking down what may be natural to most people in forming that speech and that language. But it's really teaching us how we learn and taking a deep dive into that.
Right.
Kind of
Oh, yeah.
separating those.
Yeah,
steps.
so just because someone understands a lot of language, if they haven't had an opportunity to actually use that expressively, that is all part of that acquisition of how to use language functionally. So there's going to be that learning curve with something new that's introduced. And so that's a piece that people going into it don't often understand. And but we try to help with that, right away from the very beginning.
Okay, so we've got the toy.
Yep.
What would be kind of the next step above that?
Yeah, so, and I also can point out that, so this is a voice output device. I'm digitally recording my voice into this. So that's another kind of common feature of a low-tech communication device. Typically, it's just digitally recorded voice. One thing to point out, it's really nice to find someone to record the voice that is a similar age as the user.
Okay.
And, if they want a male voice or a female voice, that's something that we need to kind of be mindful of. Maybe a young child versus, an older teen would need another older teen to complete their programming. That's a side note.
My family member only gets my voice. Now I feel bad.
Well, a lot of little boys get my voice, and so I feel bad about that too. But when we can, we might find another young child to do it for us or in the classroom. So just thinking about those things. That's just one of the features, though, of kind of the low and mid-tech type devices. We may have folks who have more difficulty accessing devices. So this is another example of a low-tech communication device that uses a digital recording. You'll see that it has multiple ports here. This is one we quite often use. You can plug in any type of capability switch. You see I have all different types here. And I don't really know what these say right now, so I'm kind of excited about this.
Hopefully no one's joking around on it.
And so you can record a single word, which is really typically how we acquire language, at a single word level. And if this is brand new, even if someone's older, that might still be the best way to introduce it so they learn what that word means. But you can also record a full message, just like I did with I Want the Ball Game. So let's see if I have this turned up.
Go.
Okay, that one just says go.
Go.
So if you can see, I've got just a tiny little button,
Go.
gives me a little bit of feedback, but that could be positioned on, they come with Velcro straps, that could be positioned anywhere for the client. This one
Stop.
says stop. Okay, really good things to demonstrate here. So playing with a toy or working with an activity or, whatever they're doing, the person can use these switches and make a choice. So this one allows me to put this on the back of my hand and just squeeze. So really in any position, someone can use that.
Go.
and I could say go.
When you're introducing that, I think of my family member maybe going to the zoo, and she's been to the zoo here in Birmingham before. But stopping in front of whether that's the snake exhibit,
Oh, yeah.
and seeing if she says stop, or when she's done saying go,
Yeah.
and we go over to the gorillas, or whatever that looks like next.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, because I was kind of trying to brainstorm about something you might use that with an older individual, and so that's a great example out in the community. Also, more and finished is a good pairing, so that could be during a mealtime or watching something or doing some sort of activity. So that's a great example. It's easy to think about go and stop when you're playing with a toy, but that's obviously not what we're going to work on all the time.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different capability switches, and in teaching someone the concept of even using a switch. So at this point, we were talking about folks who potentially have complex communication needs. So not just a language impairment where they're not verbal, but also potentially significant motor impairment, maybe a visual impairment. So they're going to need additional assistive technology to even be able to use a communication device. So there's so many things out there. That's part of what we do in our evaluation process. But any of these switches can actually be connected to other devices that maybe aren't communication devices, but I actually can connect it to the ball toy. I can demonstrate that. It's a little loud, but
Let's try it.
I can turn it off pretty
Yeah.
quick.
And these devices, I think, are really important to point out too. Can be on like a chair or a power chair or wheelchair.
Oh, absolutely.
They're very versatile.
Yeah, I actually have a switch mount that I can show as well. This one has a switch attached to it here. That'll be a good example to show you the toy. So if a child or an individual is not able to use their hands, we might even position this switch next to their head if they're quadriplegic, but could potentially have a bit of head movement and rest their head on the headrest just to move back and forth. That is certainly an option. Obviously, with an older individual, we wouldn't use the ball toy, but there's actual devices that you can plug in any electronic device to. So you could plug in a hand mixer and have them help you prepare dessert, and they can control the mixer with their switch. Of course, this could be used not just with their head, but they could use it with their foot, their elbow, their knee. It can be positioned all sorts of places.
And as we go through this technology, sometimes it will make me think of Stephen Hawking.
Oh, yeah.
Who is a great physicist and is no longer with us, but
Right.
one of the brilliant minds of our time. And the technology that he used, I think it was in his early 20s when he started to use some of this technology, but it can do wonders in helping. So it has no reference on the person's intellectual capability.
Not at all. No. Just because someone's not verbal, we should never assume they don't understand. I mean, and honestly, for the most part, they nearly almost always do understand a lot of what's going on around them. They're just not able to communicate that.
Yeah.
So giving them that opportunity is huge. Stephen Hawking is probably the most familiar, that people would be with AAC. He always used a text-based system. He had a form of ALS, and so he developed all of his language, and he could spell and was literate. So he immediately could jump into spelling, which was very helpful. And a lot of people think that he used eye gaze, but I think he used actually a switch of some sort.
I've seen some things where he's got it in his hand.
He even had one attached to his face at some point where he could just barely twitch, and it would activate his computer, and he would scan through rows of alphabet and phrases, and he would pre-prepare a lot of his messages before he was live.
Yeah.
Okay, so an example of a switch. I don't know if you can see all of this in the screen.
Let's go full screen on that, and we should be able to.
Okay, so I'll stop this pretty quick because it might be a little bit loud, but it's behind the mic, so maybe it's not too bad. But if I were in a wheelchair and this was positioned near my head, I hope it's going to work. I think I just hit it. It's not on.
And parents, you have to make sure that everything's on before you give it to your
Yeah.
kid, because they will get frustrated if they are performing the task and it is not working.
And I love trying to demonstrate technology with all the things. I just hit my other button, and that wasn't part of the demonstration. Okay, so this can be positioned really very close to my head if I were sitting and relaxed in my chair. And of course, for a young child, we might have them turn on a toy that they're motivated by so they can see this. So I can just tilt my head. That's going to turn on my toy.
That's amazing.
Okay.
That's really cool.
And you can even have another one on the other side that runs a different toy. And then, like I said, with an adult user or an older teen, you can have, there's something called a power link, and you can have it connected to a hairdryer. They can, with assistance, do those types of things, and work on those motivating activities. So
I feel there is like really nothing that you guys can't do.
Well,
it's like transforming this environment around somebody, and there's kind of no limitations there. You pretty much whatever the individual wants, you can make happen.
Absolutely. I mean, our goal really is so that they can participate in their life to the fullest extent and be as independent as possible. We want them to have the opportunities to build those skills and develop those relationships and have fun with their friends. So it's not just about communication. Obviously, that is such a huge piece of what our goals are going to be. But these switches, once you teach someone to use it with something super motivating like a toy, that can then be transitioned into a communication device, and not just a low-tech communication device. Those with very significant vision impairments may just have to use auditory cues. And these switches can be used to allow them to scan through information auditorily. And when they hear the choice that they want, they then press that switch again or a second switch. It can actually become pretty fast and efficient if they have access to 2 different switch methods.
Yeah.
So it's not just for very, very low-tech beginning AAC. It can actually move into some really complicated, complex communication skills.
I love how you mentioned that building, you might introduce that button and the toy to a child, but once they figure out that button will help them communicate, you build on top of that and you gain that trust in that communication device.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we go with really what's most motivating initially so that it's an important activity for them. And then we try to generalize that over into a lot of other communication functions. But we still let them play with the toys because obviously if these kids can't use typical toys because physically it's too difficult for them, we want to give them that opportunity. Kids learn so much through play.
Yeah.
So thinking about that, giving them all different types of toys. This one I actually adapted with the help of one of our rehab engineers in the past. This was my son's toy when he was little. And we just opened it up and rewired it. But there are companies that sell these that are already adapted. So there's a huge variety of those things available.
I think you just come here and you say, hey, can you adapt these toys? Because you guys have a whole lab downstairs.
Well, next door, yes,
building,
with vocational rehab, yes.
It's a whole lab down there, and there's like 4 engineers that are just tinkering and having. And I know it's funny because they all get lit up when they're working on a new project. They get really excited about the technical side of things.
Yeah, and this part of it is fun. So
yeah.
So moving beyond kind of some of the low tech means, we also have the next. So you can go further, even still with something that's not maybe like a computer. This would be kind of a mid-tech or a static display device. And when I say static, I just mean it may use overlays that are laminated. Absolutely. It would use overlays that are laminated. It's not like a computer screen, so they're static. They don't necessarily change when the person touches them. But this obviously is going to give them an opportunity to have many more than 2 choices. You get a little bit limited when you're using switches and things like that. And so obviously this would potentially require that they at least have some vision and have some ability to access something with their hand or fingers. But this is an example where we have a combination of some symbols, but also some really clear representation, digital pictures of the objects. And they can request help. This is an example of where one of our other speech pathologists here, her son actually recorded this for me. It was on his 5th birthday, and so it's got a really nice little boy voice.
So that's perfect for a child around that age.
Yep. And then you have one this is a GoTalk 9, and that's a GoTalk 20.
I'll hold this one.
Yep. So it has more pictures available. That one really would lend itself to allow folks to start putting single words together. So you could say, I want ball, or, just simply use the single word.
And so we have, a 5x5, so 25, and then you have 5 different sheets that can be on there.
Yep, absolutely. So there's levels that can be programmed. This is going to be more similar to the Tech Talk that you're mentioning with your family member. That one potentially has, there 8 to 32. Okay.
It has 8, and then I think it has maybe 5 switches that we can go through, 5
Yep.
different sheets, something
Yep.
like that.
So this 9 would hold up. These 3 at the top always stay the same. So those are for really important quick fires, like I need to use the bathroom.
Yeah.
Maybe yes and no would go up there, or greetings, my name is. And then these can be changed out. So you'd have up to 45 different vocabulary words that they could learn to use with their device.
Something that is, because we just had my aunt had her person-centered planning meeting, and some of her goals changed, and so her Tech Talk board was updated. It was such a pain to get those pictures lined up perfectly with the Tech Talk.
Right.
Is that something that you guys help with?
So yes, there are actually programs that allow you to do that. And without that, it is, let's just say the first program that we used for years and years and years went to a subscription basis. And so we're not able to actually get that now through the state because it's
Okay.
difficult through, funding and everything to pay for a subscription. And so I was having to use Google Images and try to line them up on a Word document. And I told our program specialist that I'd potentially rather stick paper clips under my fingernails.
yes.
So I was able to purchase a disk software. That's primarily why we use these GoTalks, because it comes with this and it
Okay.
lines up perfectly. So you have a program, you choose picture symbols or digital images from Google, even pictures that families take, and you can plug them right into those templates for whichever device you're using.
That's very nice.
So I think I gravitate towards these devices because it's much easier for me to assist with making those overlays.
So just know if your child comes in, they're getting one of these. This is the Tech Talk
Well,
they're getting.
potentially, if they're needing a static display device, this is definitely a common one that we recommend. But another thing you mentioned is it's not just a pain to line them up, but to try to keep up with those things and make them and keep them clean and keep them not wrinkled up and crumbled up. Oftentimes these paper things have to be remade, and then when you're wanting to actually change the activity, it's not an immediate shift. So really, as soon as we can go into a high-tech option for a user, really the better. It's so much better for the user potentially, but also for the facilitators and helping them to set up their communication. And so we can look at some of those options.
Yeah, because
now if
I
you want
struggle.
to.
So the Tech Talk that we have is wider, and so my normal printer won't print it off. So I
No.
can't. I have to go to USPS or whatever I'm
Yes.
doing. Have them print it off on a special printer. Then I had to run back to the house because it was wrong, and I had to purchase Canva to help line it up.
Yeah.
And it was a whole process that I was frustrated with it. And I had to take
Sure.
it back and get it laminated. But yeah, so that makes me think then, maybe my family member would be eligible, and maybe she could use a little bit higher tech device.
Right. So there's no reason that we couldn't use an iPad or something similar with a dynamic display.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we get into the high tech as we talk about a dynamic display, which is like a computer screen. It can be on a dedicated type of device, or it can be on an iPad. And so you can certainly buy iPads with different size screens. The considerations we have to think about there are vision, if they do need larger pictures as opposed to smaller, and then also access. So if they have some physical impairment that may make it more difficult for them to use a pointer finger to touch a smaller picture on a screen, or if this grid might be necessary physically for someone to be able to actually isolate out which picture they want to kind of guide them and target. Those are things we have to consider, but there are adjustments we can make to the dynamic devices that will allow those folks to still use them. But I would encourage you maybe to explore some options. There are even some really low cost and even some free options that might work well that you could use 8 icons.
Yeah, you
or
have my
3
ear right now.
icons,
We don't have to
and I
print
can
this
show
stuff.
you all that. Yeah, no, and you can have as many pages as you want, and you simply just swipe to the one that you want to provide her with. And there's not a lot of re-recording and, so those are great options.
I think that she would be open to it too. I mean, she's familiar with the Tech Talk, and she knows that when the pictures get her the coffee. I think it would be an easy transition to a higher tech. Well, let's look at what that could
Yes.
look like.
So I have several options here for that. All right. So the first one, I have an iPad mini. One thing that we think about, especially with folks who don't have a motor impairment, who are walking around, we want this to be as portable as possible, as lightweight, as small. We carry around phones and smaller iPads. This can go in someone's backpack or purse without any problem. So these are options that we might think about, and there's a lot of different apps that are available. I will say there's not as many available apps on, like, Samsung, like
An
Android
Android
type devices.
Yeah.
Definitely iOS has kind of more
I've
of
heard
a
that in general, even
monopoly
with
on
the
it.
iPhones, they're a lot better, a lot more accessible.
Yeah. My theory on that is that all of the Android devices tend to be slightly different as far as their operating system, potentially like each phone or tablet you get maybe a little different in how it's programmed or how you get into the settings and things like that. With iOS devices, they're pretty much the same across the board.
Do you have an iPhone?
Yes, I'm an
Okay, so
iPhone
I don't have
user.
an iPhone. I've never had an Apple product.
Yeah. So I didn't before I worked here.
Yeah.
And I got my first iPad here, and then I never went back.
Brought to you,
I
sponsored by
couldn't.
Apple products.
So, yeah, we had actually big conversation about this in the class I teach at Sanford, and there was a lot of joking around about Android versus Apple, but I won't go there. So, you know, it's not that Apple is better, but I do think that if you create an app that's going to work on an iOS system, it's going to work on a variety of sizes and, you know, and across the board, it's going to program the same. You're going to get to it the same. It's going to look the same. So potentially you buy one app and you can put it on multiple devices if they're all iOS systems. So
Yeah.
that may be why, you know, that's my theory
Thinking
at
about
least.
getting an iPhone.
They don't all go on phones. I will say a phone screen is so much smaller that there are some available, and that's great for folks that can put that in their pocket and go out on the bus and use it for communication and all the other things. But a lot of times in our clinic, it's going to be at least an iPad mini is
Yeah.
what we're going to be recommending. And so this has a 7-inch screen. This is just an example of an app. This one is not a free one, but it's a pretty nice, robust app. It's called Touch Chat. There's a lot of different options out there. I could go on and on about those things, but this is just an example.
I want.
Let me turn it up a little bit.
Yep.
Can y'all hear that?
We'll go a little bit louder.
So it said, I want,
I want
and then it will go to this page
to watch
to watch.
news.
So
Okay.
once you hit a button,
I
it'll
want to
automatically
watch
go to the
news.
next page.
Yep. So this is kind of naturally progressing through that sentence.
Oh, you got B-Movie on there. Jerry Seinfeld. Great movie.
Yeah, there we go. So you can customize this very specifically for the user. You can take digital images with the iPad right into the app and have the actual picture of their thing, or Google the image. If they have very specific things they like to watch, you can plug those in there. You go back to home.
I need
I need
my medicine.
my medicine. So this is a phrase-based communication system. It's not single words, but this might be something more appropriate for an individual who's older who already has acquired language. They're going to kind of know how to put those things together, but if they're not verbal, this is still going to be a really quick way for them to kind of get to those things and communicate. And with this one, there's only 15 icons, so they're still somewhat large. There's not that many.
I have a question, and I don't want to put a limiting belief on my family member, but she's been working with her tech talk for quite a while, and her Q, and things like that. And I don't know if she'll ever be able to put sentences together.
Yeah, and again, I wouldn't be too concerned about that. This is more kind of an ease of access. So if I were to only give someone single words, there's going to need to be a lot more available. And I'm a huge fan of that. So I'm not saying that in a negative way. But if there is a difficulty with access or vision, that's going to make it harder. So this would typically be used with someone who maybe needs larger pictures and maybe isn't going to be able physically to go through and put all the words together that they need to actually get their point across.
Yeah.
So we're going to give them one button that gives them several words at a time.
Gotcha.
It's possible that she hasn't ever really had an opportunity to have a lot more language available. So, you know, a Tech Talk 8 is great, but it can be pretty limiting to just 8 things that you're then anticipating what she might want to ask about.
Yep.
But not knowing her, it's very difficult to know. But I wouldn't be concerned about a sentence level.
Okay.
I'm just concerned about her being able to express the things that she
Communicating
needs to
her
express.
needs.
It can be a word. It can be a full sentence on one button. That really isn't a piece that I would be too concerned about.
Okay. Cool.
But I'll definitely show you some more options of that.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different apps that we could use here. You know, like I said, we could go into really a lot more complicated options. So we often use screens that are a little larger. That is just an iPad in a case with an app. Okay, so that would be something that'd be purchased out of pocket or through a community funding resource. We haven't even gotten into funding yet, but that can be a really complicated piece. But a lot of what we do in our ACT clinic, that stands for Augmentative Communication Technology. That's just what we call it here with ADRS. But a lot of times we're recommending high-tech dedicated communication devices that are funded through insurance or Medicaid. And so this is an example of one of those dedicated devices. In all honesty, this is an iPad. It is a brand new 11-inch iPad in a case with an app, and it has an external speaker on it to allow it to be louder for like a classroom or community environment. But even though that's what this is, this device costs, what is the cost of this one? About $5,000.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's funded fully by Medicaid, not fully by Blue Cross or Medicare. That's funded at about 80% by those things. So you still have a pretty hefty copay.
Yeah.
So sometimes we might recommend that something be purchased through community resource or out of pocket, because you can get the iPad with an app in a case if it doesn't need to be amplified, or even if you bought an extra Bluetooth speaker, that may be at about $800.
Yeah.
So we discuss all of that with families, and we make those recommendations accordingly. The really great benefit of a funded device is that it's going to be warranted. It's going to be protected. If anything happens to it, it can be repaired with the insurance. It's a medical device, just like a wheelchair, a hearing aid, glasses.
Now, when you say a medical device, just like a wheelchair, I believe there are limitations. You can only get a new wheelchair every 5 or 10 years. Same thing with communication devices?
Yeah, pretty much. It's got to be justified. So typically we look at around 5 years. And then if there is some sort of significant change to physical status, or, you know, if they have a progressive disorder that they might need something new, if we're able to justify that, it can happen sooner. But I don't know that I've ever even attempted sooner than 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So when we make recommendations, we're not just looking at that immediate need, but we're looking at something that's going to grow with that individual over the next few years.
Yep.
We may also lean toward a lower tech or a static display device that we could fund through community funding. These are only $220 maybe. We may look at that just so that we're not tapping into that insurance payment yet until we're ready to know exactly what's going to work for an extended period of time.
I've done that with my family member for wheelchairs, kind of doing a push wheelchair. You know, she's 57, and there may be a time in the near future where she needs a more advanced wheelchair.
Right.
So I'm holding off on that.
Right.
So that we can go through insurance for that.
Gotcha. So just to demonstrate this, you also see that it's got, if you can see, it's got this grid over the top, and that's something that this device comes with. It can flip up. It's not super easy for the user, which is good for children. So it adds some extra protection to the screen, but it also provides that grid that I'm talking about. Someone who might have a physical impairment or fine motor impairment that would make it more difficult for them. These iPad screens and phone screens are very sensitive, and a lot of folks will just use their hand and swipe, but not maybe have that ability to control a single finger. This actually would allow and kind of teach the user to then do that. So it's got the grid. This obviously is much more a much more robust language system.
There's quite a few.
This is a very common communication app called LAMP Words for Life. I would say I do not work for the companies that sell this product, but
we're just going to put a list of all the products we talk about.
I'm not an employee of Brent Ramick Company.
Amazon affiliate?
But I am a huge fan of this application because it is very robust, and we're putting 5,000 words in someone's hands that hasn't had any access to communication. And so there's actually a way to find and locate any topic of words that you might want to talk about, and you're not having to program and anticipate everything that this person's going to want to talk about. But obviously there's a learning curve here. It's just like learning to speak a new language. Learning curve,
but that's something that they could grow with for, like you said, years.
Absolutely. This is something we might use for a 2-year-old all the way up to any adult. It's got picture symbols, so that may not always be necessary for adult users, but I do know adults who use this who are literate, but they use this so fluently. LAMP stands for Language Acquisition Through Motor Planning. And so the concept behind it is just very similar to the way that our brain learns to type on a keyboard. Okay, so if you type with both hands, and most people now type on that QWERTY keyboard, if I ask you where Q is, you may not be able to draw out the keyboard for me, but your pinky knows where Q is.
I'm moving it right now. Yeah.
So if you think about, we don't necessarily have to look down at our keyboard when we're typing. If you know where those words are and you've developed those motor plans, you're thinking about your message and what you're typing, and not how not where the letters are. If I came in and swapped your keyboard around to the ABC layout or just some other random layout, it would take you would be so slow,
50
so
times
inefficient.
longer, yeah.
You would be hunting, searching, you would get lost in your message. And then if you finally did learn it, and then a month later I came in and changed it again.
Yeah.
There's never going to be that efficiency. So this actually allows for the user to be much more efficient and think about their message. And so it's like typing, but with full words.
Yeah, and it's important to consider that at a young age, because if they're going to continue to grow, like you said, I wouldn't want to learn a new software every few months.
Right, right.
So this is something that they can use throughout their entire life.
Yeah, the cool thing about this one is it is very extensive starting out, but it can be significantly simplified. Like if we wanted to teach the person just 10 words, we can hide everything else and teach them the motor plans for those 10 words and then gradually build on that. So it's not that they have to start out and be able to see and understand all of this immediately.
Yeah.
We can have a structured session and work on 2 or 3 concepts at a time.
This seems like the go-to. Is this what most of the
Do you
consumers?
mean this one?
Yes.
It's very
Popular.
It's a very popular, common recommendation that we make. Again, going back to someone with visual impairments or significant motor impairment, this isn't going to be the best option. So we do recommend a wide variety of apps and things, but we have our favorites. So for those users who are physically able and can, we actually even have some users who are blind that use this because, you can type on a QWERTY keyboard if you're blind and you learn the layout.
Yeah.
We do have users who use LAMP who are blind because the motor planning aspect is so strong. They do have to have some tactile cues on the screen and on the keyboard
Like
or the
Braille?
key guard. Little raised areas so that they can kind of write themselves on the screen, kind of like your home row.
Yeah.
Those are a little bit, typically on keyboards, there's a little bit of a tactile cue on some of those letters.
Yep.
And then there's a little bit of a different version for a visually impaired client. But I can pick up a device with LAMP, and because I've been using it for so many years, I'm still not completely fluent. It would be hard for me to have a conversation because I don't use it all day, every day. But I can communicate picking up any device that has LAMP. As long as someone hasn't messed with the layout, I can pretty well find things and tell you what I want to eat or drink or where I want to go or what's my favorite color or what do I want to do tomorrow. So, and just to kind of show you an example of a motor plan, if I want to tell you what I like to eat, I would go here.
Ice cream.
And that's the motor plan for ice cream. I can kind of even do it upside down. I can tell you I want ice cream and cookies.
Cookie. Ice cream cookie.
Yeah.
Okay. It becomes pretty fast. I might want to drink some wine.
That ice cream cookie would be on my, I'd be like
Right.
this.
But you don't even have, this is out of the box. It comes with 5,000 words. They all have their own motor plan, and you just gradually teach those as time goes on. So you can target any type of vocabulary with that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the most robust, the most high-tech type of systems that we might recommend. But we could get that fully funded by Alabama Medicaid, 100%.
So there may be some cost to the consumer depending on what they get, but it sounds like you guys work with them to try and get everything primarily covered through insurance or community events.
Yeah, if we feel like that they'll get the most benefit from having it go through insurance, we do that. But if we don't, if we feel like the cost could even potentially be higher, we figure out a way to meet that need with lower costs. We tap into community resources. I've mentioned that a couple of times. And then part of the Department of Rehab, we're actually, part of our agency is being able to fund medical devices for clients. There are criteria, diagnostic criteria and financial criteria that may have to be met. But we are potentially able to pay those copays or even fund a full device for those folks that need that.
That's very cool. Now, you mentioned that in order to use these devices, you would have to be have some type of mobility in your hands or upper bodies, with those iPads. But if some of that is not available, you can go kind of to the next level where you have eye tracking software.
Right. So I have that here and can demonstrate.
Yeah, so I'm going to put on this eye tracking software, guys. This is going to be really cool.
So this is really newer technology. Even since I've been here at CRS, there weren't eye gaze devices that were available to me to try with clients until, maybe at least a couple of years in. And then those have also just gotten better and better as far as the hardware and the cameras that they use. They've gotten much more sensitive, and positioning is still kind of a big issue. But if you need eye gaze, you potentially are going to have a pretty significant motor impairment. Most folks who use eye gaze are in wheelchairs. And even if they have a lot of movement, we can pretty well support them and they can kind of relax and take that physical piece out of the equation and just simply look at the screen. So that's typically our goal for the access.
Yeah, so we tinkered with this a little bit before going live, and it is crazy how the screen will pick up on your eye here. And Clifton is going to kind of change the camera angle so you guys can see, and maybe I can turn my chair a little bit so he can see a little bit more.
I don't know if y'all can hear me well from here, but what we're going to do is we're going to get this positioned, and I'm able to actually pull up a square here, if you can see that on the screen, that when Alex looks at it, I'm going to be able to see his eyes, and I'm going to be able to even track the distance of where he is with this device. Okay, so we've kind of got him locked in. If you can see that.
This is quite delayed.
Oh, okay, okay, good to know. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, this part here is where the camera is in the device. So this is actually just a Windows computer. This is called a Tobii i13 communication device. It's sold by Tobii Dynavox. But this portion on the bottom has the eye gaze camera, and it's going to be watching your eyes. So you have to think about that if you were going to be an eye gaze user, you're probably going to be pretty still in a supportive seating system. So
You can bring that chair over if you want.
okay, good idea. Okay, probably a better camera angle.
I see the two dots moving around in it.
Yeah, so that's your eyes. It's watching you. It's gonna, I think, from what I understand, it watches almost where the whites meet the colored portion of your eye, and so it's kind of watching that. So
Yeah.
how far apart your eyes are and how they move, it can really learn you specifically as the user
Yeah.
to be more precise. So what you're going to do is you're going to see some dots move around the screen, and you can blink your eyes if you need to. I want you to try to keep your head still and just move your eyes. But there's a black dot in the very center, and it almost like you're looking through that dot. Okay?
Okay.
And I see you shutting one eye or the
Yeah,
other.
one.
You can actually set this to just track one eye. So if someone has a vision impairment where their eyes don't necessarily focus together, we can actually use the stronger eye. And this can actually help someone to even build the motor movement with the eyes too. So I'm going to calibrate this. You're going to watch the dots and just kind of keep staring when it's finished. It's going to kind of finish that calibration to you. So I've got it paused right now so that you can't use it with me. Oh, I want to unpause. Okay.
So look at the two white dots.
There's a green dot with a white in the middle. I'm sorry, I said black. So you'll just kind of look through that white dot, kind of keep your eyes open. You can blink though in between. And what I'm doing right now is a 9-point calibration. So this is really the most precise that you can get. It's covering all the areas of the screen. But this is a difficult process for young children. What I actually do with younger children is I play a video that moves across the screen. It has music and sound and movement. And I might only do 2 points initially, and then I could go a little more precise as they get better at it. But we can even have it calibrate to 1 point and it learns the eyes. So continue to look at the screen there in the center. All right, what we were looking for is green, and so you got green on every point. You did a perfect calibration. So you actually closed that for me. So what I'm going to do now is pull up a keyboard, and I probably have it set a little fast, but it sees where you're looking.
I want to look around for a second.
So you can spell your name with this. I can actually, there you go. I can slow this down slightly.
Okay.
It's a little bit fast. Yeah, we're at less than a second here. Let me move you up to about a second. There we go. Okay, now let me clear it for you. Oh, you're clearing it for yourself. Okay, so now it should be a little easier. Now you've probably moved around just slightly, but you see how precise that is? You didn't quite get your L. That red has to go all the way around.
Is there a way to pause it?
There
so, like, if
is.
I want to look at what the text is coming out?
There is. Okay, so unless you stare at something for a full second, it's not going to click. So you should be able to look around. I may still have it a little fast for you. There is a way for the user to pause it, but this one is not set up like that because children will pause it and turn it off and do all the things.
Yeah.
So try your L. Let's see if we can get it. There you go. And so what I should probably do, I've got it too long now is the problem. You didn't get your E.
I want to do it real quick.
Yeah. It's a fine line on that dwell time. What's happening is you're going beyond. Yeah. You're quicker than that.
Yeah, put me on the 7s. I wanted to try
All right.
7s again.
Let me see if I did it on both. Hold on. All right.
There we go.
You can do it. Here, let's clear it real quick. Okay.
Now I got to get situated.
You didn't get your A yet. I need to turn on a click. Also, that would be helpful for you to know that it's actually clicked the letter. There you go. And now speak it up there. This one.
Alex Bim.
Oh, that's super cool.
So we got a child voice, but
Alex
and we can
Bim.
adjust that. There's a lot of different voices available. It's got word prediction.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So you can learn to use that.
Hello.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah. But I would want to pause it, you know, sometimes because it can go really fast or you really slow. But I would want to pause it because just like when I'm texting, I stop texting, I look at my text.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's actually.
Can you program that to like if I shut my eyes, it'll pause?
No, but it would pause because if you're not looking, the camera's not picking anything up.
Yeah.
A lot of people it's almost like you think about how you use a mouse and you might pick up your mouse to reposition it on the screen.
Yeah.
We have users that just kind of look just above the device or just to the side.
Yeah.
So this might be positioned here and then they can just look over it. Its positioning is very critical with eye gaze because it does need to be pretty parallel to the face and about 18 to 20 inches away, so a little farther than what you think.
Yeah.
So someone in a wheelchair would have to have this mounted in a very specific position. The great thing about that, though, is it's consistently mounted there so they don't lose their calibration very easily.
Yeah.
These can also be on rolling mounts to be used in the bed or a recliner or anything like that. But what happens is these buttons down here, I don't know how well you can see that on the camera, but there's a triangle and a square right here. The triangle can be set to pause, and you can simply look at that, and it will pause the device for you. Mm-hmm. There's also a way to look down toward the eye gaze camera, and a pause button will come up in the middle of the screen. So an adult or teenage user that is able to understand those concepts, we certainly would teach that so that they're controlling kind of their pause features and things like that.
Yeah, it would take a little bit of
Absolutely.
getting used to, but that thing is really, so how much would that cost?
Yeah, so this one, base price is around $15,000.
Yikes.
And then the mounting systems can get into the thousands. So typically a quote for an eye gaze system with mounting, we usually get 2 mounts, is anywhere from $16,000 to $19,000. I don't think we've ever gone over that for a communication device. But obviously that's not cheap. This is not something we'd recommend that someone purchase out of pocket. There are tablet options with eye gaze that potentially could be purchased out of pocket. They come more around in the thousands, like the lower thousands.
Could you get an iPad and then download the app?
So there is a new eye gaze feature for iPads. I have not seen it or used it yet. In general, iPads in the past haven't been able to use a mouse. And so that's where that issue comes in. This is a Windows computer, so these are accessible. And so basically this is just an adaptive mouse.
Yeah.
And you're just dwelling and clicking with that. But there is new eye gaze technology for iPads.
See,
I don't have it, but it's there.
Once again, going back to the technology that's created for the community, I feel like this is going to be everywhere in another 5-10 years.
Well, it is definitely more prevalent than it used to be. I mean, eye gaze used to be so hard to get our hands on, even to try with someone. And then when we did, it didn't work as well as we had hoped. So now, and not only for communication, I have a client who's 26 who's been using eye gaze for quite some time. He didn't start out that way, but he uses eye gaze now, and he messages me on Facebook Messenger. He actually has become much more literate. He even in high school wasn't a great speller. He could read okay, but he wasn't a really good speller, and so he has improved significantly in the last 10 years with his literacy skills. But he's on Facebook. He has done Ancestry.com, and he sends me messages about his family and his ancestors and the wars they were in. And it just has opened up so many doors for him. And obviously, vocational opportunities for someone. He has quadriplegic cerebral palsy. So it's just huge for him. And he uses his eyes for everything, not just communication. He gets into the Windows features of the device and these are set up so he can access Netflix and all the different things. So
yeah, that's awesome. There's so much you can do with that. But it does cost quite a bit, but you go through means of helping.
Yeah, this is always funded through insurance or Medicaid, and typically the folks who would require eye gaze most often will be eligible for CRS with their diagnostic criteria to assist. So even if insurance covers 80%, even though, there may be a co-insurance amount that CRS can help with, or the companies have payment plans. Private insurances, because these are complex folks with complex communication needs, they do tend to cover quite better. The issue with the kids who are able, or individuals who are able to walk around and touch devices, insurance companies know that the iPad is available.
Yeah.
So that can sometimes be the hurdle we're having to try
They'll
to
be
jump
like,
over when they know that there is something available for a lower cost that might work.
Yep.
It's harder to get that funded through a private insurance, but the great thing with Alabama Medicaid is they will fund any of these at 100% if we're able to kind of document and justify that need.
Yeah, to prove that they need it.
Mm-hmm.
Grateful for that, because this is a game changer.
Yeah,
for
but
a
I
lot of
wouldn't want to
people.
discourage someone who doesn't have Alabama Medicaid coverage to not pursue this, because there are so many options available, and we really would talk through what's the most beneficial for the client, but also for, financially, we want to get the most cost-effective option for the family as well.
Yep. Very cool. I appreciate you taking us through those different devices we have, all the way from low tech to very high tech with the eye gauge. And what we'd like to do now is we're going to kind of show some videos that ADRS has of individuals using some of these devices.
Okay.
And we're going to kind of pause the video and comment it for you guys. So at this point, we'll go over to the computer. We'll kind of switch up, and Clifton will bring up the videos.
Okay.
And we'll bring our microphones. And perfect. We'll do the 4-minute first. Okay, so we're going to bring up a video that ADRS has created here, showing some examples about how augmentative and alternative communication devices are used. So we'll go ahead and start that. And I'm unfamiliar. I haven't met Mrs. Chisenhall yet. Go ahead. We'll keep playing there.
My name is Maddie.
So there is Mrs. Chisenhall.
I live in Alabama.
And it looks like she's using...
I am 17
And
years.
what device is she using there?
Okay, so she's actually using a PRC accent device. I believe that's the accent 1400.
I am in 11th grade.
And she is not using eye gaze. It
I've
looks
known
like
Madison
she is
since
using
she
eye
was
gaze, but
3 years.
she's actually,
Yep.
she's actually using what's called a head tracker. So you can see on the top of the device there, that portion is a tracking device that uses an infrared signal. It sends the signal out, and she is wearing a reflective dot. It's a little sticker, and it's placed on the end of her nose.
Yeah, I did see that in the intro
And-
part right there.
So she's basically moving a mouse cursor around her screen. What she is using is Lamp Words for Life. So that system that has the motor planning in place, so that's really efficient for her.
And there you can see a little, just a little dot right on the nose that is
Yep.
tracking that movement there.
Sometimes people might wear those on their forehead, but we also like to recommend just buying a pair of sunglasses from the Dollar Tree, something kind of cute, popping the lenses out and putting that right on the bridge.
That's a good
That way
idea.
you're not really having to reuse the stickers as often, and they can put the glasses on and off.
So there you can see that little dot right there. She's very happy. And it looks like there's quite a bit of mounting here.
Yes. So that is a good example of a mounting system. That would be similar to someone who would use eye gaze as well, where it's positioned out in front so they can visualize the screen and then access the device. Positioning is similar for a head tracker as it would be for eye gaze. Maybe not quite as precise.
I'm familiar with Gina Dees.
Yes.
She is here in Homewood.
No, Jenna
Oh,
is
she's up in
actually,
Huntsville.
so this client is in our Huntsville district, so I haven't met her before, but Jenna is the speech pathologist in the Huntsville CRS office. So she does the same thing in Huntsville that I do here in Homewood. And we actually have 6 or 7 district offices with speech pathologists. We just actually hired a second person here in Homewood. She's out of town this week, but so we have 2 here in this office, and then Jenna actually also, they got a second speech pathologist just last month in Huntsville.
So you guys are growing.
Yes, we're growing with the need for everybody needing AAC, and it's been such a great year for us in that aspect.
So here we can see kind of her support team and her family around her, and they've been, I imagine, a big part of her coming in and getting assistance.
Sure.
And through CRS. So, and we can't really hear this right now, so we're just commenting on kind of what we see here. But we see the mounting again. Here's an aide at school. I'm just going to let that play so they can hear it. So here, you can really see the mounting kit right here.
Yep.
So it's quite a big arm that will come out and make sure that the screen is right in front of the individual. And it seems pretty compact and secured on there pretty tight.
It is. It's actually, there's a receiving clamp that is installed on the frame of the wheelchair. I can't tell if that's, we can do this on a power or a manual wheelchair, and there's just different clamps that you purchase according to whatever wheelchair they're using. And that is the only piece that actually stays on the chair full time. That pole, that arm can come off very easily as a whole unit, and then it can fold up and be transported pretty easily. So those do not stay on there all the time. They obviously kind of stick out and, make navigation a little bit more complicated, but they're really easy to use. They've become much lighter, more lighter weight as the years have gone. And so that one that you see in that video is potentially the most common one that we would use for eye gaze or for any, access method that's going to require them to have it mounted.
Mm-hmm.
Madison is in regular education classes with her aide, whereas most children
She's very happy there.
with disabilities sometimes get put into a self-contained classroom. However, with her
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
Mm-hmm. So kind of similar to how it looked when you were using eye gaze with the keyboard, you can potentially see that mouse cursor. We usually have like a red cursor on the screen. This one looks like a small hand. And so as she moves her face, she's moving that mouse cursor. And when she hovers over the target that she wants, we can set a time that you would need to hover. So that can be really easily adjusted. With younger kids, we typically start pretty quick so that the computer responds fast. But then it gradually gets a little longer so you can be a bit more purposeful and you can kind of scan around your screen without activating. So a lot of times we aim for right around 1 second of dwell time.
Yeah, so she's going to hover over this and it'll click what she's hovering over.
she has been able to open her world.
I love my friends. I love my family.
And I'm thinking, oh, she'll never learn how to do this. And it really worried me, but it didn't take her no time to
Do you notice that that a lot of parents and family members think that, oh, this is going to be too high tech for my family member, and then they...
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times, the technology, people just, can be a little bit afraid of technology, especially really high tech kind of things that look complicated. But especially with younger kids, gosh, they pick up on it so fast. And kind of like I said before, I'd much rather take that leap of faith and let them try something like this. There's different reasons why we might go for a head mouse versus eye gaze. I would say we use eye gaze a lot more often than we used to. And so the head mouse used to be a bit more popular than eye gaze. There's differences in cost and things like that. But head mouse to me is a bit more complicated than eye gaze. You would potentially need to understand the concept of a mouse.
And
It's
somebody
a
might
little
not...
bit more of an it's not quite as direct of an access method, even though it looks very, very similar to eye gaze. She really has to have the ability to keep her head still. Whereas with the eyes, the head can kind of move and the eyes can kind of lock in on something. So it's just a different type of method. But so with the head mouse specifically, we would see people potentially feel like that's going to be more difficult for their users. But gosh, with practice, they tend to do okay. And it's certainly easier than trying to use their arms and hands that really aren't cooperating with them.
she could do just whatever they wanted to do.
She goes to CRS for an appointment. I go with her to
Can we pull up a split screen here or no?
Maybe the one on here that she needs to know.
If I turn this
The
one
aide that
around,
she is
can
with
we?
has been with her since she was in school. So with that kind of
Oh.
support, she's able to do anything she can. She is very intelligent. She memorizes everything. She has a memory that won't quit.
I want to work on the computer. I love my face.
Gotta love social media there.
I'm looking up on the internet for the baby doll.
The computer has been a life changer. We don't,
So there you can see you can see some of the movement
On the internet for the baby doll.
of that of her face there and her nose. See how she's doing that there?
life changer. We don't have to get.
There you can see her eyes going where she wants it to, even though it's not an eye tracker.
I want to go home.
Yeah, it actually requires very little movement, and that can be adjusted as well. Kind of that vertical and horizontal movement required.
On there, and she was able to hack the system. But I called the company, and they said, I don't know how she did it. So she may be really interested in math and computers down the road.
My favorite is math.
We're just gonna kind of let this play so people can get a gist of it. All right, so here she is using the calculator.
Instead of fun.
And then we have a second video I'd like to pull up that does a little bit more eye gaze technology, and we'll comment on that. Or anything that you'd like to add to this video?
Yeah, so I just want to add that, unfortunately, people may assume without her device, because Madison may have speech that's difficult to understand, or if she's not as verbal, I don't know her personally, but they may assume that she doesn't understand because she doesn't respond the same way that other teens do. And so clearly she is extremely smart. Jenna was talking about how she kind of got out of her communication system and got into the computer features of the device, and she's using her calculator and doing all of these age-appropriate academic tasks. And without this, it would just be really hard to allow her to participate in that. But being able to demonstrate kind of what she understands and how smart she is, it just really changes how people are going to interact with her, and just what her opportunities are going to be. So that's such a big piece of this. It's just
huge.
allowing someone to demonstrate kind of what they understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, giving them that communication. Okay, let's pull up the eye gaze technology, and we'll start. And this is kind of what we were working on not too long ago. So what's going on here? She's actually moving her wheelchair through eye gaze.
Yeah, so that is one of the Tobii devices, similar to the one that you tried. That one's a little larger potentially, but it is mounted to a power wheelchair, and there is technology that is available now that will connect through the device and through the power wheelchair that allows it to control the movement. And so what she's looking at on the screen, she can actually view through the screen at the environment in front of her using the camera on the back of the device. And then she's got those squares that she sees on the front, and she can just look at which direction she wants to go. You can look in the middle and stop. You can turn on a dime. Most of us that have used this technology have now tried this so that we can potentially demonstrate it for our clients and have them try it. It's complicated.
Yeah, it's like a directional pad there on the
yeah.
screen, is what it kind of reminds me of.
It's really neat.
I wonder if we'll do this in cars in 20 years. We'll just have it do it. They'll do it on their own.
Yeah.
That's basically what they're doing in self-driving cars. Is
Yeah.
kind of that thing.
Some of the bigger concerns with this are just the positioning of it. Obviously, it's sticking out in the front. But it's an awesome option for these folks that can't control a power wheelchair with any physical form, their head or limbs.
Well, just like, some of these devices we're talking about give the opportunity for communication. This is giving the opportunity for mobility.
Absolutely.
And that's also huge in someone's freedom.
Well, just independence.
Independence, yeah.
So that next slide is going to show a different communication, like a different language system. You were using just a keyboard with the eye gaze, but typically we use picture symbols, similar to the other devices that I demonstrated today. This is the TD Snap software. And so it's got picture symbols, it's got single words, full messages. You navigate through that to get into various vocabulary options.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like
Kim Smart is our speech pathologist in the Anniston and Gadsden district. So she does this job in that office, in those offices.
Now, she is speaking, but I don't have closed caption for that.
Oh,
It doesn't seem to be on the video. We'll let that play.
that's not Kim. I'm not sure who that is. maybe a coworker.
All right, so I thought that was extremely cool. We'll go ahead and walk our mics back. I love that being able to navigate your power wheelchair through the eye gates. A power wheelchair may be something that my family member gets in the next few years. Right now, the only time that she's able to maneuver without assistance from one of her caregivers is when she goes to the pool at Lakeshore.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is something that I've thought about. Some of her other family members have been hesitant on providing that, but I think it would be a good thing to do. She will not be able to move it on her own. So there are two options. She has some mobility in her arms, and so she might be able to use like a knob there to kind of do that. But the eye gaze technology is another level. It's a whole another level.
It's really complicated. We've had a few clients that we've tried it with. I think it has maybe been recommended for one in Kim's district. But it is complicated. It's, and it's a little scary,
Yeah. Now we've talked about some of these devices, and as you can see, a lot of them are mounted. But if I imagine a child using these devices, it could be quite of a backpack experience where you have to pack up everything. And what would you say to some parents or individuals that are thinking like this is going to be rather clunky?
Yeah. So obviously the larger systems, those are reserved for the folks who do have issues with access for the smaller devices. If someone can use their hands and carry a device around, we're always going to try to default to the most portable option. And so for a young child who might need to carry a communication device, they're going to come with carry cases and shoulder straps that they can actually wear it on their person. We take all that into consideration. But when you're thinking about all of the mounting systems and the eye gaze systems, they are quite large. They kind of have to be to allow, for that precision. But they do fold up. They, like I said, the mounts are lighter weight than they used to be. We do several mounting options, so they're not having to transport them everywhere. The device itself can be put in a carry case that it comes with, and it can hang on the back of the chair when it's being transported. So it is a big accessory that they might have, and that can be a complaint. But that's where sometimes those lower tech options come in as a backup. So it may not be that they're able to even use eye gaze. It's quite fatiguing, honestly. So it may not be a 24/7 activity. And so when they're not using it, there are backup methods that we have through low tech options, picture symbols, eye gaze. And then we've also talked about just the importance of their natural communication functions. This is often something that I talk to caregivers, family members, school staff to really, really learn this individual's ways of communicating. Those are always going to be the fastest way. So you mentioned yes, no. A lot of times someone's able to develop at least a very positive or negative response. Even if they can't nod their head or say the words yes or no, you can kind of tell when the response is yes versus no.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm going to default to that natural means of communication rather than putting that on a device that may make that a little more complicated for them.
Yeah.
Some folks develop ways to say yes and no. The eye gaze user that I mentioned that uses all of the Windows features, who's 26, he actually simply glances upward for yes and kind of to the side for no. And if you know him and you've been around him, it's extremely fast and efficient. It becomes very obvious. But one thing we've started talking about is even filling out paperwork, like having a parent complete a form to give to school that says, when he or she does this, this is what they mean, this is what you should do. So it could be a facial expression, a body gesture, a sound, a tongue click. But if they use that and it's successful for them, that is a very valid piece of communication. So in addition to the big clunky eye gaze systems and mounts and things like that, we need to really be,
cognizant of what they're naturally saying anyway. Because I feel like for us, and I've only been a part of this for my family member for the last few years, but I feel like there's been a push to use the tech talk, even though the people that are around her know what she's communicating. But I don't know why I've been feeling that, but we've been to use the tech talk so that if she's in a scenario around other people that are unfamiliar with
Right.
her, that she can still go back to the tech talk and it's kind of universal there.
Yeah.
She doesn't like it as much. And those that are around her and know her, they know what she's communicating
Yeah.
most of the time anyway.
Honestly, we don't feel like people use their communication devices as much with families, and that can be frustrating for the family. Obviously, we want that for them, but they've developed communication. Depending on how old they are, they have that many years behind them of developing a way to communicate with their loved ones, and the device is going to be harder. And so we tend to talk again about it supplementing what they can't naturally communicate. We also talk a lot with family members, school staff, therapists about modeling on the device. So if a user indicates something and it's very clear to the listener what they want, they shouldn't have to say it on their device.
Yeah.
But you could certainly model just to reiterate that if they're with somebody that wouldn't understand that, this is how they would do it.
Yeah.
But to then have to do that in actual real life would potentially be frustrating to the point that they may not even look at it.
Yeah, it'd be frustrating
Like
for
that
me.
is a communication of get this out of my face. I have told you what I want.
Yeah, and sometimes she will do that.
I bet she does.
Yes,
And, you know, and I'm kind of glad that she does. I mean, I know that can be frustrating, but that makes me feel like she definitely does understand. And so just even being creative about what's on there, you know, if, and then just in what opportunities she might need to use that. It is important to teach her that if she is with someone or if the time comes that she is with folks that do not know her as well yet, that she needs to know how, because she's not going to automatically know how.
Yeah.
So that's the hard piece. I mean, you walk that fine line, but getting creative and then modeling that. So just constantly doing it yourself, you know, because then it also helps you to see what that might be like to use that.
To understand that. And I tell, you know, if there's somebody that knew that we're training to be on her team, it's going to take you 2 to 3 weeks to learn her communication
Right.
style. And what I'm also hearing is get rid of the yes, no. Because the people that are around her the most, you know, we pick up on that very easily, and put on things that are more motivating.
Yeah, I wouldn't make it unavailable, but you could even simply have symbols for yes and no outside of the tech talk that are just easily accessible, like even, I don't know where she sits, but on a table or armrest. But if she has a natural means of yes, no, that would be somewhat clear to other people,
Yeah.
that may not be a priority. I don't say take it away. That it probably sounds that way. We do have it on devices. A lot of people really want
It
that
makes sense
piece,
when you say
but
it.
it does occasionally take up real estate for things that might be more functional.
Yeah.
If they can naturally communicate a yes or no.
Well,
Yes and no's tough, because it's like if I ask you, you know, did you go to Publix in May? Like that's such an abstract yes question. But if I say, do you want this pizza? Like, you know, the level of yes no can be so
yeah.
crazy. And typically where it's a choice making activity, we're asking someone, do you want this, yes or no? You got a 50-50 shot.
Yep.
So if there's a positive or a negative response or a way to make a choice like that, that's what I would kind of default to.
We do that sometimes where it's like, do you want to get your nails done right now?
Yeah.
Yes or no kind of thing. Do you want to go get your hair cut done today? Yes
Do you
or
feel
no?
like she more quickly indicates yes without that device and it's clear?
Yes. I think a lot of times she puts her hand over it like this. I'll touch whatever you want me to touch. Get this thing away from me.
But if she wants her nails done, is it pretty obvious? Like even if she didn't have the device in front of her, can you tell that she does want to or not? 'Cause
Yes.
That's where you'd warrant a yes, no. If they don't have a natural way, you would maybe need to teach that, because that is an easy communication feature. But
No, because if we put the nail stuff down in front of her and we're like, do you want to do this? If she does, she'll put out her hand like this.
Okay.
Like, yeah, let's do it.
so yeah.
Yeah. So we don't
So it's
really-
kind of a
it's an
50-50.
overkill there.
And yeah, so she shouldn't then have to say yes on the device if she's put her hand out to indicate, yes, do my nail.
yeah.
Right?
So I got to go back. Great.
I'm
Now
not
I'm
critiquing.
creating new sheets.
I'm not
going back to the
critiquing.
prints.
No, we're going to look at some iPad apps today.
Yeah, I tell you.
Before we leave, we're probably going to set up a visit that I'm going to see your fan. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
But
no,
we'll see.
I think it would be great.
Maybe even
And
at least via Zoom.
in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you know, an iPad would probably be a great thing for her.
Yeah.
And we'll get a casing for it just in case she doesn't want it to be in front of her at that
Yeah, I'll
moment.
show you some options.
Yeah.
We can talk more.
And we're going to kind of come to the closing of our broadcast here. I know we didn't get to everything on the list here.
Right. I told you that I could kind of ramble on.
No,
This is-
I enjoyed
I'm
the
so
conversation.
passionate about this, so I
And we can always do another follow-up. Like
Okay.
maybe we have, if someone's interested, maybe they use a communication device and they would like to do a broadcast with us.
That'd be great.
We could just do it again from here, and they could kind of show, and we could talk more about that.
I actually have had some ideas of folks who would be great and
Yeah.
would like to do that.
I don't know if you're familiar with McCartney Hagar.
Yes.
She is awesome. I
She
met
is.
her. We've talked probably for the last month and a half.
Yeah.
We met her in person last week. She was on a broadcast.
Yeah, I watched that one and then the one she did with Jenny.
Yeah, so she is
She's
knocking it out of
great.
the park.
Yeah.
And she is coming on to do weekly content for us.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got free reign of whatever she wants to talk about.
Yeah.
She's going to do great. I'm very proud of her. And she said maybe one of the things that she'd like to talk about is some assistive tech,
Yeah.
being here, that kind of stuff. So
I've worked with her some in the past just with that piece of it, the assistive technology piece, even since she was very young. And she's a remarkable young lady. Like
she really
she's
is.
going to go far. So I'm super proud of her.
I just bought her a book because we were talking about some of her long-term goals and advocacy, stuff like that. It sounds like she might be in Montgomery and then maybe DC eventually. And so I got her this book by Dale Carnegie. I'd recommend it to anybody. How to Win Friends. Basically get along with people.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be rubbing elbows. So that should have came in, McCartney, if you're watching. If it didn't, let me know.
That's awesome.
Are there any upcoming events that you would recommend that anybody attend, either virtual or live, that you can think of?
I don't have any specifics. There's a lot of opportunities available quite often, honestly, and especially kind of in the little more virtual world we're living in right now. There are several companies that have readily available online trainings. Anytime that a LAMP training would be available in the area, we do have them typically each year. Obviously, this year and last year have been quite different, unfortunately, but hopefully, that will get better and we'll be able to have more in-person opportunities. We do some trainings here, but as far as like larger public
They're just
events,
not
I'm not
happening
sure.
right now.
Right. I'm not sure of any right now. But if anybody's interested, you can look up LAMP Words for Life. There are some online tutorials and trainings available for that, and just explanations of different language systems, and we can maybe make those available to links for like Toby Dynavox. There's a lot of different trainings for their TD core language systems.
we'll
But I
put in
can't
a
think of
couple links in
anything
the chat.
specific. I'm sorry, what?
We'll put in a couple links in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be
to
great.
some of
I'll
that
send you
stuff
some
that way.
links.
And is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you think an individual or a family could benefit from hearing?
Yeah, so I think specifically about CRS and just the referral process for ACT clinic, and who may or may not, anyone really is eligible with a significant communication impairment, but we don't always recommend full enrollment if it's something that financially we might not be able to help with, just because the process can take some time. But you can put my contact information here on this post, and I'll be happy to talk to anyone. We can get referrals from families, school staff, other agencies. I'm happy to talk with any family about the process and whether it would be beneficial for full enrollment with CRS. But that clinic process might be kind of a whole other conversation that we could have.
Yeah.
But it does take some time. Typically, all of the offices have a bit of a waiting list for that clinic. We have clinic here twice a month, but other offices have it different, once a month maybe. And we tend to evaluate 4 or 5 clients each clinic. And the waiting list for that, it may take a few months from the time of enrollment, 3 or 4 months to actually be evaluated. And then the funding process also takes typically around 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
Particularly for a high-tech system, because they are so costly. The paperwork process can be quite extensive. So I just want to make people aware that it's not a very fast process, but obviously we're working on something that's going to be beneficial for a lifetime. And so that first 6 months may seem a little tedious, but we will get there. And I just want people to kind of realize that from the beginning. It's not like a super quick fix that they're going to come in. I'm going to hand them this high-tech device and say, good luck, have fun with your saxophone.
And then, their child's going to start using it next week.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
It is a process that we hopefully help with. We certainly try as much as possible to kind of walk people through the whole process from the beginning. And then certainly we keep track of our users over the years. We do consults through
Follow-ups
other
and-
clinics and community visits and things like that, and we reevaluate when needed, and we upgrade devices when needed. So we also help with repairs if anything happens to the device. So enrollment with CRS for those reasons might be beneficial, but that could potentially be a much longer conversation too. So.
Yeah, and one of the big things that I got from our conversation is, don't hesitate to start that process even at a very young age.
Right.
Like you said, it can take a few months for everything to get up and running.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have questions or you feel like your son or daughter may be not keeping up with their peers, reach out and do an eval. It does
Yeah.
not hurt.
And we can meet informally and talk informally. They don't necessarily have to wait 3 to 4 months to just have us lay eyes on their child. Every person may not be, a full AAC evaluation may not be warranted, but if we feel like it is, we even sometimes, when possible, can provide applications to schools or other agencies to give the user some time to practice before they're formally evaluated. Sometimes it's unfair to have a kid come into a new environment. They're probably pretty nervous and there's a lot of people staring at them, and you hand them this device and we expect that they're going to be able to use it correctly. And so that can be a bit overwhelming. So when we can, we try to provide loaner options or provide apps to agencies to practice. So like I said, they can reach out to me at any point and we can discuss that whole process. And then whether, it's something we could start to work on, you know.
I love the idea of the loaner, tinker with this
Mhm.
and it'll make it a little bit more comfortable.
Right.
And we'll put your email and your phone number in the chat as well so that people it'll be her home phone number. So call her 2:00 in the morning.
Right. Absolutely. A personal cell.
Mrs. Baggett, we really appreciate you spending the morning with us and introducing us to what's available through CRS and ADRS here. And for any individual that you have questions, please contact Mrs. Baggett and get on the ball there. So at this point, appreciate you guys being here with us, and we will see you next week. And we'll both give a wave to our respective cameras.
Thank you so much.